I appreciate you giving me a heads up. Sorry that we missed. So for everybody who just joined and you're watching this video later, just FYI, we didn't record earlier. I'm not going to cover everything that we just did, unfortunately, but it's a couple minutes, so it shouldn't be the end of the world. But we're talking about arrays and the fact that over here, you can have an array of objects, and this is one object, and then inside of that, you can still have more arrays, right? So here, this is an array with 2 elements. So what I was just demonstrating is when I log out scope.powers0, I'm going to get the first element, the first item in this array. So this makes it an array, the fact that it starts with the square braces. And so if I refresh, I see, okay, here's that object, right? So, and inside of here, I have tags, and I can see that there are 2 different tags. So this proto stuff here, this is the prototype chain. I don't think that I actually want to explain that probably in this course. It's quite a complex topic in JavaScript, something that took me a long time to understand myself. But for now, just don't worry about it. So in any case, then I can take this further and say, okay, tags is at index 1, because this is index 0. Name is index 0, and then tags is index 1. So if I now add that to it like this, and I log it again, then I see, oh, is that oh yeah, what's that?
0 dot tag.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was about to. Thank you. Yep.
You also need to share your screen.
Am I not sharing my screen?
Or seeing your face.
Oh, really? Oh, thank you. Oh, there's the benefits of attending in person, I guess. I apologize to everybody who's on the internet sometime. Okay, cool. Now we're live. All right. So yes, so you can reference it by dot tags. So then we refresh and we see, okay, here's our list of tags. And then take it even further, and we can say, what is the first tag, which is at index 0. And so that's supernatural. Okay, so that's how we basically walk these trees, and we just end up doing, I could just say, hey, what is the name property for all of these things? So if I do scope.powers.length, I could just list out console.log, and then it's scope.powers I. So this I will recursively, what we call recursively or iteratively step over every object, and then I will change with each pass. So if I do I and then I just add dot name, then I'll get a list of all of those in my, and what's happening behind the scenes is Angular has made it a little bit easier. You don't need all that code, and we just do tag in this .power.tags, right? And then it does the rest of the magic. It is quite literally doing exactly this behind the scenes because it is JavaScript. So at some level, that's exactly what it's doing. There's even more code because there's certain complexities, which actually we will, I hope, take a look at in a little bit here. I plan to anyway. So we have that, and so now we have this list, right? But the goal, where I want to take this is, I want this to be something that's interactive, right? So that's where I'd like to go next, which is right now we have a list, and we can see, okay, there's a lot of potential here to do some complex work with this, and that's cool. But I could have just typed this out, right? So the interactive portion is why it's a web application. So what I want to do is take a look at some of that sort of interactive capability. So what I want to do is go to my next bit here. So from here, I have, hey, where did it go? In the toolbar. Let me fix one thing. So there was one thing that we had wrong. So notice here that, oh, okay. that's working. Okay, we'll leave that alone. That's fine. I won't get, I thought that I had something that I noticed was wrong when I left off in the last class, but no, it's good. So one of the things we want to do is have what I'd like to do is make it so that we can search this list, right? So right now, there's only about 20 items, so, but let's imagine that there were 200, right? And we want to find a certain item in the list, and the whole purpose of this application is to make that easier for people to look up something in this list, right? And so you could do that via a search like Google, where you just hit search, you click the button, and then you should see another page. But that's not as fun as what I want to do, which is just actually make the page change as you enter text content into a search box. So in that vein, what I'm going to do is add an input container. So let's see here. Oops. Okay, that's fine. Good. See if that works. Cool. So this is from Angular Material, so we'll visit that again just to make sure we close the loop on what's happening here. So again, one of the things I wanted to do with this was give you guys some tools that you can use that are sort of off the shelf, where somebody else has gone to a lot of pain and trouble to set this up so that it's easier. I use this all the time in my day job because if I had to reinvent the wheel every time I built a product, I would never get anything done, right? So we leverage existing technologies to help out with this stuff. So where is it? Input field. Here we go. So this is just a demo from the Google team, and they've showed, okay, this one's disabled, so when I click it, nothing happens. This one has placeholder text. This one doesn't. These ones at the bottom have validation. You should charge at least $800 an hour. That's nice. I wish. But anyway, you can get rid of it because it's expecting a number over 800, right? So if I put 500, then it tells me that. So these are all cool little things that it took someone a long time to make this behave this way. But we just get it for free, and we just say, thanks, open source technology. That's great. So I'm going to use that component here to have a place to put my rules search. And so this is the HTML for it. Just to quickly jump back in here, if you're referencing this and you're sort of playing the home game, these guys have a source bit here where you can peel back the sort of and look at the guts. And in here, here's all the markup, the HTML that makes up that. But there's also other stuff, which is JavaScript, which is, like I said, that's why I want to cover both, because both are important ingredients to the overall thing that we're going to try to build here. So there's also documentation for this. So if I click here, I think this does a little bit more explaining. Now, if you have zero web development experience, this might be a little bit tougher, but you'll have to just Google around, and you can get some answers by searching on, especially Stack Overflow. So everything I know, I learned on Stack. No, Stack Overflow is a great place where programmers, especially web programmers, go to ask questions. So when you're new, you can jump on there. As you get more experience, you get like this increase of people that are willing to help you because they can tell that you know a little bit what you're talking about. But you'll find generous souls on here who will answer your very beginner questions when you first start out. So that's great. That's the only reason that I was able to get as far as I did. So that being said, so we have our input field now, and we can enter some text into it, but nothing happens. So how do we make that happen? Let's take a look at that. So over here, so let's talk a little bit about what this does. I just want to make sure that we don't leave too many mysteries here. I think that this is actually unnecessary. I don't think it'll change if I Yeah, so that's not necessary. This is another component in the Angular material library. It allows me to have an icon, right? And so in this case, this icon is a person, and it's not showing on the screen because I have not loaded the SVG asset that does that. We also don't want a person, so that's another thing that's just kind of junk that we're going to get rid of. But we do want the label, so that's what, I could change this to say whatever I want, obviously. And then we have the important thing to note here is ng model. Ng model is going to tie the data that's inside of that text field to something that can be accessed from my controller, right? So if I do, we have this special thing called, let's see, search query equals. So when we start, remember how we have a string. The way we create a string is by having single quotes surrounding something. So the string value is Brian, but these quotes are required in order for JavaScript to know that that's a string. If it's like this, then it thinks that that's a variable, right? So it thinks that there's a variable called Brian because it's not wrapped in single quotes to indicate that it's a string, but there is no variable called Brian, so it'll fail and it'll complain about that. So we'll put that in there, but we actually want this to just be a string that's empty. So right now it's a string. That's the type of data it is, but it has no content, right? So this is not going to produce any change on the screen, so I won't show that. But what we'll do is, this is a cool thing that Angular does. A lot of the magic that it does depends on what they call watchers. So watchers take the JavaScript data that is living inside of the browser, they watch it for changes, and then they allow you to do certain things when those changes fire. So what I'm going to demonstrate now is anytime the search query variable changes, so this is the same as referencing this stuff in the template. Remember how we use $scope here for powers, but we don't need the $scope here? Same is true with this. So we just reference it as search query, not scope.search query. And then we do function. And this function does some magic behind the scenes, which I'll explain in a second. So remember how before we talked about this, where I demonstrated functions and I say scope.my function, and then I use the parentheses, that invokes the function. So remember we talked about that last time. So what's happening here that's more complex, but I'll break it down for us, is right here. If I look and I ignore this bit in the middle, I can see right here I'm actually invoking the function. So you have the parentheses on either side, so we're invoking the function. But remember before how we talked about console.log, I can create a function that says, okay, scope, let's build this out, and we'll say scope my function equals function, and then we'll accept a parameter, and the first parameter is message 1, and second is message 2. I'm going to repeat myself some. I don't want to. Sorry for people who catch on quickly, but I think that some of these programming concepts are tough if you're brand new at this stuff. So I just want to make sure that we're clear about it. So what we'll do is hello from message 1, and then, oops, or no, let's do this. Message 1 is, and then we'll say, hey, here's the content of message 1. And we'll say message 2 is, and here's the content of message 2. And what I'll do is I'll load this up, go to our console, and then scope.my, that load. Yes, I want to stop. I need to stop my code here. So when we load the code, it's tough to operate this big. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So what I just did was I put when you open up the sources section, this is a really good tool to have in your arsenal, your tool belt. Understanding the way that the Chrome debugger works, which is what we started touching on before, is really critical to being able to understand what's happening sort of under the hood. So what I did was I went to the index.html because that's where my JavaScript is located. And I'll pull this down a little bit so we can read more clearly. And I put, by clicking the number in the margin here, it puts a breakpoint. And so that means that whenever this JavaScript runs, I want it to stop and pause right there at the point where I put this what we call a breakpoint. So I've basically stopped when the controller's loaded. And so now I'm inside of here, so I can do scope is what? Okay, so that's scope. Remember how we talked about you know, these large objects and how we kind of stuff a lot of stuff in there. So function has been declared right here. So now that the scope dot, the $scope dot my function has already been declared, I can use it. And I can say, okay, hey, what is scope of my function? There's a, like we said before, last time, there it is. So now let's invoke that function. And what we're going to do is, if I could see, I'm being blocked by the Google Hangouts thing. Let me move this over here. We'll do it this way. So scope dot my function, and then the first one is you know, message one is Brian, and then message two will just be my last name. Yeah, I'm gonna move it. Don't worry. That's annoying. The Google Hangouts thing's in the way. My last name, right? There we go. So message one is Brian. Message two is Feaster. Right. That's my first and last name. So in the same way, so now to sort of walk us back to where we started from, this scope $watch will accept a parameter, right? It accepts a certain number of parameters. The first parameter is search query. So we have the string value, which is search query. That ties it to an object, which is declared here. And then the second parameter it accepts is a function. And in the same way that this $watch is a function that accepts these two arguments, right? These two parameters, in the same way, this is true inside of here. So again, this is complex. It takes time to understand this stuff, but there's a lot of nesting, right? So now we have our parameters for our $watch function, and then our parameters for our anonymous. The fact that this does not have a name in JavaScript, we call that an anonymous function. So this is an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name. And so that secondary anonymous function that it accepts as a parameter, this part is what you look up on like the Angular documentation online, because it says whatever the first thing that you know, I can make this A and B if I wanted to, right? But what happens is Angular does a bunch of magic behind the scenes, and when they do, they will execute this function. And whatever that function is up to you. So I'm going to say, hey, I know Angular is going to magically provide the A and B data here, but then I'm going to do something with it, right, inside. So what I do in this case is old val, new val, because I will just console log this just for simplicity like we've done before. And a common syntax for this is like this, where we put the first parameter and then the second parameter, and then we have our function block here, and then this is our close. So, yeah, go ahead. So when anything that I use dot notation to declare with an equal sign, this is a variable, right? So I can also, search query is also a variable when I do this. But without the equal sign, it has no assignment. So variable assignment is what I've done here. And so when it has no assignment, then it's not useful to me because I can't use it to do something with it, right? And if I log this out in my console, it's just going to say undefined, which is something that you'll see lots of if you ever do a lot of JavaScript development. Can't do this of undefined because that variable is empty. It doesn't have any content, right? So when we add the equal sign, that tells it, hey, assign a value to that variable. So this is called this is the variable, this is the assignment, and then this is the value. So that's the technical term for these three components, right? And so does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Like the one, next one? Yeah, and the next line, why is it
Oh, why is it here?
in quotes there?
Ah, okay. Right, because that's a great question. So if I just did, it could be search. It could actually be possible that this would work. I'm not 100%. Let's double check that. Yeah, so that's what I thought would happen. So there's a certain amount of complexity that Angular kind of swallows on your behalf. Like you don't have to deal with it, and that's part of why we use these technologies so that we don't have to sort of do things longhand, what you would say, you know what I mean? Like go the long way around to do things. So Angular, it only accepts search variables, and the way what it will do is it will attempt to, internally, it will attempt to do something like this. Scope, and then search query. So when Angular's doing its stuff behind the scenes for you, it's actually executing something like this. And since we passed in this string, what that ends up looking like is this. Scope, when it's executed, it ends up looking like scope search query. And this is an interesting component, right, in JavaScript, which is I can do, you've seen me do scope.searchQuery like this, but I can also get the same value returned to me by doing it this way. So, so what's happening is it's saying, hey, take this string, and then behind the scenes, Angular is going to do this, which will pull that value out, which is what it's looking to do, right? So, so that hopefully that explains that part. So let's see if I start typing. So
we should always call variables in quotes.
No. So I like in JavaScript, it's you can do it either way, and both are okay. But dot notation is generally preferred. So if you know the variable's like value, the reason that you do it the other way is because, and sorry if this is complicated, I'm doing my best to sort of go slow here, but I could also say for this object, I could say iterate over the powers object. I don't necessarily know what the key is. This is called the key for every one, and so I pass it in by variable. And so in that way, that's the reason that that method of calling a value is helpful, right? We use it for that purpose. But in the simpler version, I usually always go with this, and this is what I do in most of my coding day to day. But if I'm doing some more complex task, I might need that other method because of what I just explained. So let's talk about what just happened. If you guys saw, it logs out B and then R. So what happens is every time with the ng model bit, so let's come back to where we started, right? Remember how I said I wanted to talk about ng model? So ng model ties the search field, whatever text it has is now tied to this variable called search query. And so every time that value changes, that model will update, and then you can see it here, right? So it goes from B to BR to BRI. You can't see that. Oh, okay, sorry. That's tough to see. So anyway, that's the idea, right? So what we're saying is, hey, watch this variable. Every time it changes, every time the value changes, update it. And that's what we're doing inside of scope.watch, right? Scope$watch. So now what I want to do is, okay, I know that variable is always changing. And what I want to do next is I want to match up that variable with, I want to filter my text on the basis of it, right? So that's the next step. So this is just a demonstration, so I'm going to delete that because that's not really important to our end goal. I just wanted to prove that it's working and show you, give you a little bit of an idea about how that works. But now what we want to do is use a filter. So remember before how I said that this little bit of magic, there's a lot happening here. Well, what's cool is we can take this a step further. And where did my list go? Here we go, this one. I will hide this because that's too confusing to look at all that at the same time on this large text. So at my first ng repeat here, what we'll call the outer one, right? So in our MD list item, we're saying this power in powers. I can add a pipe. We call that character a pipe. It is above the return key. When you hold shift and it's backslash, that's the pipe key or the pipe character. We can add a filter here. So what we can do is we can say, hey, filter this list on matches for search query. Now, I think I remember, I think that works. Yep. So let me zoom out just so we can actually see what's happening. I zoomed in for the purpose of this demonstration, but let me show you that originally we have this whole, watch my scroll bar on the right side carefully, we have this whole list, and then I start typing, and now we have one item, right? So what's another, let's see how many C's are there. Now there's a lot of C's, so S, nope. So anyway, is that working? Anyway, you get the idea, it's working. So this is another bit of magic that Angular does for us for free. So we can add filters to our lists inside of our ng repeat. And you can actually do sort of like multi-filtering. You can, in fact, do, if I had another field that also had another value on it, I could pass another filter and that other value. And now it's going to match either or, and it will present the list on the basis of that. And again, the amount of programming that's happening behind the scenes is quite serious here. You know, not huge, but something that would, like, you know, take me a couple days or whatever, you know, just to do that one little thing. And anyway, so that's the idea here. So with that being said, does anybody have questions about where we are right now? I know that I sort of ramble a lot. Cool. All right, I'm glad it makes sense. One thing I would suggest is, if you're up to it, again, I'll post this online. It's already available, and I posted it previously. But this whole project is on GitHub, and you can go to the GitHub repository, and you can click commits, and you can see me walk through the process of creating this. And one thing that I think would be great, if you felt, if you're here and you're thinking like, oh, this is really interesting, I'd like to dive in, you could try to just follow my steps on your own, you know, and you could just say, hey, okay, what did he do? And then you can just look at it one by one, and it'll show you there's nothing in the first commit, right? I started from an empty state, and then I just said, okay, hey, let's add, you know, this little script that just says hello world. So you remember how last time we talked about that. And then you can just kind of walk through one at a time, and the complexity increases kind of like gradually over time. And the red here means this thing was removed or changed, and then the green means it was added. So that's how you can tell like that I changed X or Y in the project as you step through it. So like here I added, here's what we just did now in class, right? So I added the search query variable, and I added the input box for the input container and the input field for that bit. So yeah.
So to make that search box work,
Mhm.
put the markup in for the form,
Mhm.
and then the watch thing watches what's typing in there,
Yep.
passes it into the list.
Yep.
That's how.
Yeah. So the list, what happens with the list is the list says, hey, okay, I want to iterate over the powers object and do something for each one of those. But then we add a filter to it, and it says, oh, hey, when you're doing that, make sure that the thing that you're about to spit out on the screen matches this. So this can be much more complicated. We could have this power stuff could have all kinds of numbers. It could have this could be a list of baseball players, and that each baseball player is aged from 20 to 40, whatever. And you could have a function here. You can actually pass a scope function. So I could have search query. We'll call it scope function. I could do this, and then over here come and define a function like we've seen before. And in here, it's going to, you know how there's this idea of things automatically getting passed in, as parameters, right? When the function's called, the magic of this angular filter is for each one, it passes in the data for that particular node. So the first time, it's going to be this object. And the second time, it's going to be this object. And now that I have access to that data, if this were a list of baseball players with ages, I could have a variable here that's tied to scope dot min age equals 30, and then scope dot max age equals 40. And I could take this a step further. I could make that a list where you can select 25, 35, 45, right? And those variables update. And then every time this filter is executed, I can write stuff in here that says, hey, if scope dot min age, if the value is passed in, so value would be the baseball player's object. So one of his values would be, so let's make it a little bit easier. We'll call it player. So in here I could say if player dot age is greater than the min age and player dot age is less than the max, then scope dot max age. And all that this expects is a return of true or false, which means yes or no, include it in the list. So now what I've created, and I have more work to do if I were to really do this, and I just don't have time. I don't want to type in front of you guys and change this whole thing. But what I've now created is a special custom filter that says, hey, here are the different ways that we're going to filter on this. So that's actually where we're going to take this next. That's the next phase of the evolution, and I'm just kind of explaining it in advance. But what we're actually going to do next is I want to make it so that I can filter on any text value. So what I want to do is I'm going to say if the text that's entered in this field, the search query variable, if it matches the name, then include it. If it matches content in the description, then include it. If it matches content in the effect, then include it. So right now what we have is this problem where it's like, it's tough to think of an example, but like if I search for the, why is that not working? I'm not sure. Oh, I broke. Oh, right, because I changed. So I changed my filter, so now I broke it. But search query, like the word. All right, there's the blinded thing, right? But the word the appears many times, and yet, okay. So what it's doing now, it has a default behavior, I think, which is if there are 0, it's going to show all. So I think that's a little bit of a sort of mysterious, confusing thing that's happening that's confusing me right now. But anyway, there's no word that has the in it, but it still shows me something. But the problem is, what I would actually want to do is find all instances of one of the powers that have a certain word or a certain series of letters in it, right? So we'll do that. And then the other thing I want to also do is make it so that you have these tags, right? Like this one says supernatural or physical, right? So I want to say, show me all the ones that have the tag supernatural, or show me all the ones that have the tag physical. And then inside of that, I want to do a text search and say, like, because imagine, and I'll try to fix this between now and the next time we meet, which I'll sort of add a large list so that it's a little bit easier to understand. Hey, we have 1,000 things. We really want to make sure that we're more efficient about how we search this, which is the goal of like this little application and what we want to do with it. So that being said, I think that I'm not sure if I was clear or if everybody knows or saw the Facebook invite, but we are shorter tonight because I have to, I have a friend that wants me to help him out, and so I need to do that. And I think now is a good place to start because the next 7 minutes is not enough to dive into the next place I want to go, or at least not to do it without rushing and being confusing. So I'm here and I'm happy to answer questions, and then if not, we can just call it. And we'll be the same 2 hours that we were the previous time next week. What's your question?
Oh, I was just trying to find the specific project we're working on in GitHub. It's your name, rule search app, and I'm on that page.
Yep.
But now I can't see where exactly the rules dash search app file is.
So it's index.html.
Okay, I thought it might be, and it's currently updated with. Looks like it might be updated with what we did tonight.
Yeah, it's actually, I think I went a little bit further than we did tonight with this. So we didn't.
CSS and stuff in it.
What's that?
It has a bunch of like CSS links.
Yeah.
It doesn't really display.
So
It doesn't have all the text that you weren't able to pull to show typing out, so that we can see what exactly we did and if we want to test it out later.
yeah, okay. So to answer, to shed a little light on that, I'm keeping one of the things that's cool about GitHub. So I won't talk a lot about GitHub, but at some point I'd probably like to because it's an important tool in my tool set, is that you can create branches. So like we could all work together on the same project that has this one starting point, and then we could each branch off into our own separate things and do different things. And then we can actually merge them so that they all sort of like come together later. So if you click here, you'll see that there are different branches, and there's one called Progress. So the one that's called Progress, this only has 3 commits, and this just shows, I have not yet done it for tonight, but I will between now and next session. This actually shows the real code that we did, not just the example code that I'm storing in the main, what we call master branch. And that's my reference of, just so that when I'm teaching this class, I don't know if you know, but I mean, this is very informal for me. I just sit at home, I code a little bit before, and then I come in here and I just show how I got there, right? So it's pretty ad hoc, informal, and that's where I keep my main stuff, is on the master branch, like I said, over here. And you can get a preview of where we're going. But if you want to see exactly where we ended at each at the end of each session, you can look at the progress branch and see that. So I'll update this repository with that after tonight. And it's not going to match the latest on master because we didn't get all that done tonight. Cool. So hopefully that is clear for everybody who's here, and then also catching this recorded later, how to get caught up. And like I said, I recommend trying to walk through it yourself. See if you can come with questions next time, because one of the things that I'm kind of shielding you guys from is there are certain things that are real confusing. You miss a comma or a period in the right spot, and then you can spend half an hour or hours and hours and hours if you're unlucky, unsure of what's wrong or why it's not working. So if you sort of dive in yourself, you might have some of those questions, and then I can sort of shed light on some other sort of basic programming principles that maybe are things that I don't make mistakes on when I'm coding live just because I've been doing this for a long time. You know what I mean? So not that there's a shortage of things I'm messing up. So, but anyway, I'm going to stop the hangout and I'll let you guys go, and we'll see you at 6:30 next week.